Hi, I'm Diana from Sew Outside the Box. Welcome to today's video tutorial. We'll be sewing a mug rug with some applique, some quilting, and some hand stitching. There's a link to the pattern in the description box. It's a super fun and easy project. Let's get sewing. Go ahead and cut your fabrics according to the written instructions. I'm tracing the shapes from the pattern onto my Heat and Bond Lite. I'm tracing onto the paper side. You can use any fusible web. I mostly use Steamacine, but today I'm using Heat and Bond Lite. I may do a video in the future comparing some of the fusible webs to see the differences, but they all work in basically the same way. I'm only doing these two shapes here to show you the next steps, but I do have a full-size piece ready to go for the quilting. I'm just going to do these two shapes to show you how I do it. I did an informal poll on a wool applique website, and it seems like most people either use a pencil to trace their shapes or a very fine-tipped Sharpie. And then rough cut around the shapes with your paper scissors. Just leave a little bit extra, about 1/8 of an inch all around. Then press your cut shapes onto the back side of your scrap fabric. You only need very small scraps for these applique pieces. It's a good reason to save all your scraps. And you can use whatever colors and patterns make you happy. I do suggest for the main fabric that you do use a lighter background so your applique pieces show up. Now I'm just cutting around my shapes after they've been applied to the back of the fabric. You can see when I'm cutting that I'm actually not moving my scissors much, I'm turning the fabric. This is the best way for the most control in cutting these small shapes. The fingers look a little bit long on this hand, but I'm not going to worry about it. Hands, just like people, come in all shapes and sizes. Then peel the paper off the back of your applique shapes and you can apply these to your fabric. And once I like the look of it, then I just put the iron on it for about 10 seconds with the iron. I'm going to hand sew around the applique shapes. I could do machine sewing around these, but the shapes are so small and I like the look of hand stitching that makes everything stand out a bit. I'm just going to do a simple running stitch around the pieces. Here's the thing. The applique is very permanent, but theoretically the edges could fray after some washings. I think it depends on how often you wash your applique pieces. I do have a test one that I'm going to wash several times to see what happens. I may do another video about that. Anyway, I like to do some stitching on the applique pieces, whether it's machine or hand. Here's my main fabric with all the applique pieces on and the hand stitching finished. And I like the way it looks. Now I'll add the border pieces. I'll do the top border and the bottom border first. I'll place my border right sides together with the applique piece, and then I'm going to stitch along with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I've sewn on the top and bottom border pieces. I'm going to press the border piece up and the seam allowance is pressed towards the border also. I'll sew each of the side border pieces with a 1/4 inch seam allowance and press them open as well. I finished the top borders and the side borders and I pressed the seam allowance towards the edge, and now I'll bring in my cotton batting. And my cotton batting is cut just a little bit larger than my main piece. I'm going to clip around the edges and then I'm going to take it to the machine and I'm just going to sew some wavy lines in between my balloons and my hands. And I'm really just trying to attach my batting to my applique piece, but also give it a little bit of definition. I might do some on the sides also. stay tuned for this bit because I'm going to show you a really cool trick with bringing the threads to the back. So I'm not going to use a back stitch. I'm going to start up here right at the seam, and I'm going to come wavy down all along the edge, and then we're going to flip it over, and I'm going to show you how to bring all those threads to the back, and we'll tie them off back there, and the front will look really neat and tidy. It's a very cool trick. Here are my wavy lines in between each of the hands and the balloons, and I didn't backstitch at the beginning or the end so that I can show you how to bring all the threads to the back, and we'll tie them off in the back and make it look really neat and tidy. It's really easy. We find the back thread, which is for me the white thread. I give it a little pull. I think you can see that the stitch came loose. I'm using my little ball head needle here to get in the loop, and then I just pull through. So now that thread has come from the front to the back. That's how easy it is, and it really makes your work look very sharp. Easy. And then once your threads are all pulled through, you won't need to do it too many times, but the top and the bottom, then you just go ahead and use your regular knot just to tie these threads off to secure them. Okay, now I'm going to square up my project so I can get ready to finish it up here. This is the home stretch. I put the backing underneath, the backing fabric underneath. I'm going to bring in my ruler, and I'm going to do it like this. I'm going to use this seam here as a guide for squaring up this bit and getting the top part the way I want it. And so I'm going to use one of my ruler lines here to line it up with this seam. So the seam will be my reference guide. And I'm going to go as close to the edge as I can using my reference guide, and also using my rotary cutter just to trim all of these layers. And then turn to this side, and again use the side reference seam, using this seam here as my reference guide for squaring it up and just getting nice and close to the edge in line with my seam. Oh, there we go. Great, and now my piece is all squared up. I'm going to bring this backing fabric from the back to the front. Because we're not using a bias binding on this, we're going to actually turn it. It's going to end up looking really cute, but we're going to sew it up like this. So I put the lining fabric on top of the main fabric, right sides together, and then I'll take it to the machine and I'll sew around with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I'm going to leave a 2-inch opening on this side so that we can turn the piece right side out. I've sewed around the edge here. I've left my little gap for turning right side out, and I'm just going to trim the corners and the seam allowance. And so when I trim the corners, I'm going to do that on the diagonal. I'm going to get nice and close to my seam line here, but obviously not go through it, or else you'll end up with a hole in your project. And then I'm going to do that to all 4 of the corners. And that reduces all the bulk in the corners. So when we turn it right side out, we can get those corners nice and sharp. I just use my rotary cutter for that, but you can use scissors, and I am going to use my scissors to trim the seam allowance down. And I'll trim the seam allowance on all 3 sides, but I'm going to leave this seam allowance where my opening is. We need it to tuck it under. And once I get it mostly right side out, I'm going to use my corner pusher tool. That's what this is, and it's invaluable. I recommend you get one for your sewing supplies if you don't already have one. And I'm just going to push these corners out gently and make them nice and square. And you don't want to push too hard because it can go through the other side, so just gentle, but it really is effective. It really works great. And I'll bring my iron back for the final press. And now on my side opening here, I'm just going to tuck everything in on itself, this small opening. Give it a press. And now when I go back to the machine, I'm just going to sew top stitch about 1/8 of an inch from the edge all the way around. It's going to be really cute. So I finished up the outer edge with a 1/8 inch seam allowance top stitch, and this was really easy and fast. It looks cute, and we didn't use a bias binding, which really speeds up the project. It's a nice quick way of getting it done, and it still looks really sharp. I hope you like this free mug rug pattern and project. Please like and subscribe to my YouTube channel to see lots more. Thanks for watching.